Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest installment of the NACDA and Affiliates virtual programming lineup. I'm Dana Leroy, Communications Manager for NACDA, and we're glad to have you here with us. Fall is almost in full swing, and it's a new season for all of us. Every campus looks a little different, but whether your student athletes have returned to competition or to the classroom, or if you're still operating remotely, this discussion that we have for you today will benefit administrators at all levels and stages of return to play action plans. Our speakers, Drew Berst and Dr. Kevin Boully, are back once again to provide analysis and practical application techniques from the third installment of their survey of sports fans over the last 6 months. Drew is the practice director for collegiate sports at Dimensional Innovations, and Kevin is a senior litigation consultant with Persuasion Strategies. This is their third NACDA webinar examining their survey of nearly 600 fans relative to their thoughts and feelings of returning to live events. Drew also wrote an article recently that appeared in the latest September issue of Athletics Administration magazine that was driven by data from this project. It's really good. If you missed it, you can check it out on NACDA.com after the session. We are looking forward to diving back into this topic today, but before we begin, I want to remind our live attendees who are using Zoom to utilize the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom window and send in your questions throughout the presentation, as Drew and Kevin will be facilitating those throughout their discussion. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Drew.
Thank you, Dana, and thank you all for joining us, and thank you again to NACDA for letting us do this, and thank you to Kevin, Dr. Kevin Boully, who is showing proof that just because you have a doctorate doesn't mean you get to stay in nice hotels. Kevin, where are you joining us from, by the way?
I'm in Port Townsend, Washington today. I think you're muted, Drew.
Unmute, there we are. Let me see here if I can get you lined up. Sorry, I shouldn't have made a snarky comment. Now I can't make the
yeah, paybacks go quick.
make this work. Okay, sorry. Hold on, everybody. My apologies. Just want to get to full screen so everybody can see it. And we'll get moving. Okay, here we go. And it might drop you for a sec. If not, I'll rejoin everybody. Hold tight. Share screen, and we should be go. There we go. Cool. All right, my apologies. Okay, Kevin, Washington. So I assume you're doing your day job right now, by the way, in Washington.
I am, yeah. Learning every day, but doing my day job today.
Perfect. So what we'll cover today, by the way, is this. I wanted to give everyone a rundown. We'll run through the history of the surveys just so you guys have that, and of course the findings, but also understand, right, at this stage, we want to understand how to put this into practice, what this information really does for us beyond just understanding the fans, but understanding the methodology and the why we've done this is, we understand, quite important. And then so for anybody who kind of doesn't know our history, is joining us for the first time. So again, I'm Drew Berst. I'm with Dimensional Innovations. We are experiential designers. We're actually designer builders. So in other words, what we do is most of us know us for making great experiences inside of stadiums and outside of stadiums and arenas, inside athletic facilities, but also in other industries. Which the reason we were really drawn to this task, this challenge, is because we do believe this is still all about the experience. It's not about a pandemic. The pandemic is just a constraint by which we now have to design. So that is why we undertook this effort. But we also know that we're not experts at surveying people or understanding sentiment. And that is really where Kevin comes in. So Kevin's a dear friend of mine and went to college together. And I leaned on him because of his expertise in understanding people. And Kevin, you want to give a little background on you?
Yeah, you bet. So what's relevant most here is just that I have a background in designing and analyzing surveys and assessing how people are reacting to various pieces of information. I do that primarily in the legal arena, where I evaluate people's reactions to lawsuits and to trial presentations and those kinds of things. But my PhD is focused on assessing people's reactions to a variety of different communication variables, including constraints like what Drew just mentioned, that we're now dealing with a variety of different ways that people's lives are constrained, and surveying the public across the country as to how they're reacting to the pandemic and what they expect from this new wave of changes in their behavior and in their worlds is part of what we wanted to put our skills together and see what we could evaluate with people's reactions to sports coming back and to participating in live sports in arenas and stadiums.
Yeah, so right, to kind of put that, in my dumb mind terms, what was important to us is when the conversation started way back in March about COVID and how it was going to impact, live events forever, we kind of said, I don't know that what people are saying is accurate. That really we've got to understand the real fears, the real concerns that the people are having, and therefore understand how that's going to impact their behavior short term, and then learn from history and other events about long term. That really we again, keep your eye on experience is the focus here. It's an event. It's got to be a good experience, but understand how COVID is then impacting, right, the underlying emotions that you're dealing with that are unique to the current time. And that is really, that's where we were coming from. Experience first, right? COVID second. However, right, we understand the safety measures here. We aren't saying you ignore safety. We were saying you of course have to abide by given guidelines, but you've got to understand what's the real motivation here, what's really driving emotion, because emotion drives decisions. Sorry, so we pass this. So here's our methodology, by the way. 3 surveys over really 5 months. And Kevin, you want to give a little more scientific explanation of this?
Yeah, so we just tried to we tried to sample from all 4 major regions of the country, and we started with our first survey getting almost 600 respondents, knowing that as we ask those same respondents to do follow-up surveys in the following couple of months, that we would get some attrition. So that's what you see in the top of this box on the right. That survey 1, we started out with about 600. Survey 2, we asked those same 600 people to respond again and get an update to their feelings about things, and we got about 400 respondents. And then the 3rd survey, which we implemented in August, we got about 300 of the original 600. So we feel great about that response rate, that we ended up with actually less attrition than we thought, and we were able to maintain some of the geographic distinctions that we wanted and get a good response set of people. This is important, I think, just because we are looking at how these same individual people's reports changed over a 4 or 5 month period. That's different than pretending to assess, what every American thinks. But we're mostly focused on what's the change that these 600 or so people will show us over the course of this time period.
And I got to chime in just because I think a lot of people do this. More is not better, right? So I know a lot of people might see this number of X number of people surveyed, and there's actually a reason you only survey a specific group of people. Kevin, you want to explain that real quick?
Yeah, it just comes down to the sensitivity of what you're actually finding. That if you survey 1 million people, then your sensitivity is going to be such that you're potentially finding things that really don't necessarily apply, because you have so many people to consider. Here, we feel like these numbers are adequate to get a sense, again, particularly of whether or not these particular respondents are reporting changes in their own perceptions of the same questions over this 4 so month period.
And the sample size is representative of a general national fan base, right? That's kind of the key, demographically and regionally.
That's right.
Perfect. And by the way, there's a 4th survey. We'll talk about that in just a moment. So here's your time frames, right? So kind of right as COVID's beginning, right, and then further over time, and then you'll see the fluctuations as we go. So we're not going to go through every single question. Really, we're going to focus on the key changes, the key issues over this period of time, so you guys kind of understand. So we'll start with this part, right? So to what extent are the following safety concern for you if you were to attend a sporting event?
And what you see here on this graphic, it's best to just kind of look at it at the macro level. That what you see in each one of the rows, the colored or the shaded rows, is the 3 surveys in the 3 different colored dots. The bottom dot in each one of those rows, the darkest blue, is the most recent survey. And so what you see is that people are reporting in August the highest levels of concern on these different issues than we have seen throughout our surveying. I think for us, what we're seeing is concern went up in August after things reopened, and that's a pretty steady finding. It's most important, or most, I think, impactful, where you see people's concerns focused on things that they can't control. So hand soap, hand hygiene, those things actually didn't increase as much in August as some of the other ratings of social distancing, of other people, of more or less being afraid that we can't control our exposure to others, and that's our greatest concern. You know, this comes, I think, with as we learned more as a country and as a globe about how the virus is being spread, people's concerns shifted a little bit away from hands and touching and more towards space and breathing. And I think you see that reflected here. But for us, the point here is concern is up in August in our most recent survey.
Yeah, right. So people are more concerned and more concerned about, not to give away the headline, but other people, right? As Kevin said, the things they cannot control, in particular, other people.
Yeah, and the next slide, you'll see we have the corresponding data that the interventions that we are proposing that would hopefully alleviate people's concern and get them back in participating in sports events and stadiums and arenas. Those interventions mattered less. So again, if you kind of look macro at this graphic, that bottom blue dot for each of these rows, these are the different interventions, like social distancing, like hand washing stations, like taking temperatures at the gate. And what you see is that those interventions people are reporting will make less of a difference in motivating them to go to stadiums. In this third survey, we saw these interventions made the least difference of the 3 different times we've surveyed folks.
And you see the common, again, the common theme, while everything went down, certain things were more important than others. But in particular, I found it interesting, a lot of people talking about, ticketless or whatever, mobile scanning of tickets, no touch food service, things like that, just really are not the ones that move the needle and became less important. Even so, self-service of food and beverage became less important, again, over time. So I think those are intriguing as again, okay, where do you look to invest to move the needle, right? Some of these, you can start to see what matters and what doesn't. Again, that's not to say you fly or you go against any given guidelines, but you start to understand what people care about when you're speaking to them.
Right. And then the next slide shows, I think, another really important piece, which is that what I think you can interpret this conclusion is people are now looking at this as a long-term change, right? That we are no longer in a period where it's going to be a short period of frustration with the pandemic. We get over it, we go back to normal. You're hearing that kind of in media more widespread now, that there is no normal, where this is life going forward. And I think you see this reflected in these data here. And I know there's a lot of numbers on the screen, but what you see in our most recent survey in August is that 63% now say that they would not attend a sporting event that was not limited in some way for at least a year, right? That's almost 2/3 of people who say it's going to be at least a year before they go back to the way things were. And I think equally important, still 41% in our third survey in August say it's going to be at least a year for them to go back, even if the arena or stadium is limited to half capacity. So I view these as long-term indicators, or excuse me, indicators of long-term change, that this is not a thing. It's a normal now that's going to be consistently dealt with. And I think, we did some surveying in April and in July for a different project that isn't specifically about fan sentiment. But what it revealed was that from April to July, that group of folks that we surveyed, they reported less hope. So down 7% just from April to July, people who said that they reported feeling hopeful about a response to the pandemic. And what went up during that time was people expressing anger. And so I think what we saw is a shift from hey, we're hopeful we're going to get through this. Yeah, it's anxiety provoking, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. And we've shifted, I think, in July and August to this isn't going to go well. I'm more angry than anxious. I'm more angry than hopeful. And I think you just see that reflected in people's views of the long-term nature of this change.
Especially our changes, right, Kevin? Again, you're making some assumptions, but it would seem to align, right? That you see that change effectively from reopening to the resurgence, right, of COVID. So everyone was very hopeful, optimistic, midsummer-ish, June, July-ish, when when things were starting to reopen a little bit, and then became completely dejected at the idea of having to go back undercover.
Right. Yep, that's right. And I think that this idea of the corresponding, increase in anger that came over time also speaks to the next slide, which is, we're talking about people's relatively stable reports of what they miss or what would make them get back into a sports arena. Some of them miss sports, but in that bottom box, what you see at the top of survey 3 there, that 57% in August say that they would not attend a live sporting event in the next 6 months because of their concern about COVID-19. And that's up 7% from June. So that's a pretty meaningful increase in a survey of this size. And knowing that people are saying that they're not going to go to a sporting event because of their fear, I think aligns with this more long-term view, and also the view, like Drew said, that kind of comes with the resurgence that we saw after the lockdowns.
Good. More changes over time here.
Yeah, more changes over time. This is, I think, the point here is in August, we saw 71% of our respondents who said they were somewhat or very concerned about the coronavirus. That's the most of any of our 3 surveys. So the highest level of concern for us came in August, not in May, not in June. And I think, I think this also it's worth noting that among most of the surveys that I've seen nationwide, there have not been a lot of surveys where more than about 3/4 of people say that they're concerned. That you sort of have a baseline of about a quarter of people say, I'm not that concerned. So this suggests that August, these ratings are pretty high, that people are concerned and they're changing their behavior. What you see in the bottom box there, 94% said that they're changing their behavior at least a little, if not a lot or a great deal. And 60% say they are changing their behavior a lot or a great deal. Which is, again, that's pretty sustained change for 6 months into the pandemic.
Yeah, for sure. Again, keep in mind, right, same group of people. So a true reflection of changing sentiments.
That's right. And, I talked about the increased anger that we have been observing in some of our surveys. We've also observed increased distrust in some of the institutions and government that we've asked about. So people over time, especially between April and July, reported significant increases in distrust for the government to handle this pandemic appropriately. And so one thing that we have certainly seen that be tied up in politics, and I think also potentially tied up in people's trust that others are going to solve this problem for them, and more self-reliance, that people are taking a view that they can't trust necessarily others to help them as much as they thought. And so people are tending to look to their own self-reliance and their own options for how they control their safety.
Yeah, right. And
direct
that's
implications, Drew.
Sorry, say that again, bud.
I just think it has direct implications on some of your design, ideas.
For sure. And by the way, I should preface this with, we are not making a political statement ourselves in any way, shape, or form. With kind of the next couple slides, what we're actually showing you is that there is a political implication to decisions, and a political implication, right, to exactly what Kevin just described. That opening your gates to a live event period is going to attract a specific type of person, and then the more or less safety measures that are in place, right, and how much you speak to COVID as part of your plan has, again, an implication as to exactly who you're going to attract. So kind of as a baseline measure, here's kind of how it plays over the three scenarios. And again, this may not be surprising, or it may be, but we think it's really important because it is indicating, understanding that a place that generally speaking draws us together, right? A stadium or arena, right? That's usually a place where people of all different types, all different backgrounds come together, unite under, the same message. Well, this has the implication of doing just the opposite, right? If handled the wrong way.
Yeah, and the punctuation mark I would put on that is, I think we have become accustomed to seeing these political divides in almost every area of life now. And to me, this data just shows that sports is not going to be different.
Yeah.
At least as it pertains to managing safety, as it pertains to the virus.
Yeah, not insulated at all from that. And I think this is a really telling one, right? You see the impact of capacities on a given, on identifying either as a Trump voter or a Clinton voter, right? You can kind of see how this plays out.
Right.
And here's to give you like kind of a direct example. And luckily, to my knowledge, we're not really seeing this, but it's worth mentioning. If a certain state, city, or county allowed for someone to have more than social distancing capacity, let's say, for example, if a state allows 50% capacity at a stadium or arena, and the institution went forward with 50% capacity, the odds are you're going to attract a higher risk, less concerned, right, and specific demographic of individual at that event. And by the way, therefore, probably increase the risk because people are less concerned about it at that capacity. But immediately you become a polarizing scenario if you actually execute an event at that level, if that makes sense, right? Versus as you see as capacities go down, you see a neutralization of that viewpoint, right? It becomes more comfortable to all people of all backgrounds. Am I saying that correctly, Kevin?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think you're just seeing, you can see a potential impact of the differential attendance rates that's driven entirely by people who are also taking different precautions in every other aspect of their life.
Yep. So it also kind of speaks back to social distancing and to a certain extent masks as the measurement, right, of people saying, okay, that's the one that I kind of trust. Like that's the one I understand. It's the one that actually gives me some peace of mind. It's the one I kind of believe as a genuine measure that makes a difference, right? So again, we asked them all about different types of guidelines, different measures, whatever it may be, but you sort of all end up back in the same place of, I'm afraid of other people. I don't know how they've been behaving, right? And social distancing is the one for me, and or masks, right, that makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, and masks, because it goes back to that component of control, right? That people feel like they can be self-reliant on masks if they're afraid enough, that they need that. That's their first layer of control. And then the second is, if I can't control it through that, I want to keep people further away from me.
Yep. So then we went ahead, we wanted to see, right, what's the impact of looking outside the stadium and tailgating. We were kind of curious, right? I wonder, in working with clients, actually, we wondered if you just didn't have anybody in the stadium, but let everybody tailgate, would anybody go? Would it make a difference? And the short answer is no. that really, I think the same concerns carry outside the stadium as much as they do in. Is that the way you would read it, Kevin?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and so therefore, was it a revenue opportunity as well, right? Would people pay more for a tailgating experience? And right this moment, again, the answer is, as things stand in their current state, no. The answer is no.
Right, and it's kind of the usual suspects of people who said they would be interested.
Yeah, right. Diehard fans.
Diehard fans, younger folks, more conservative politically folks who are more conservative politically.
Yeah. So what we did, so one final note that we did is we actually asked the same pool of people again over the weekend to follow up on a few different items from our previous surveys to see if anything's changed now that games have started. And so, Kevin, you want to kind of speak to what we found? This touches on a few bullet points, but there's even a little more than this.
Yeah, so we, with football starting up and some of the strategies that different areas are using, we wanted to evaluate, maybe we ask these lower levels of capacity if that really moves the needle as to people's willingness to attend events indoors or unspecified, whether it's indoors or outdoors. we did see that reducing capacity to 5% of the stadium or arena's capacity was the most successful proposed strategy.
It's probably great news for this audience. Really happy.
Yeah, I mean, it's and it was relatively linear that if you moved it up from 5% capacity to 10% capacity, you lost 4 or 5% of the people who said they would attend right away. And the same when you jump from 10% to 15%. So the folks were showing us that they are viewing capacity as a clear indicator of their comfort, and it is a pretty clear linear relationship. So that was, I think, one thing that we were interested in, and that it still, however, does not change things all that much. That you didn't get that big of an increase from going from 25% to 5% capacity as far as willingness to attend soon.
Yeah, which I think is a very important point that kind of leads to our next stuff. But I will also mention, we also asked about testing, and I'll speak more to testing. But Kevin, you want to explain what we asked and what it showed on testing?
Yeah, so we did ask about people's willingness to attend an event if they knew that everybody would be required to have a negative test in order to enter the event. And surprisingly, it was not a big motivator, that people were not more likely to say they would attend an event even with negative test requirements than they were if the capacity was limited to 5%. And I think one take on that is it goes back to the discussion we had earlier about trust, and whether people are not trusting the testing technology, or whether they just don't want to put that confidence in someone outside themselves. It is potentially an explanation for what's going on, that people trust more their own ability to keep themselves safe with masks and distancing than they do with trusting testing technology.
Yeah, so this, right, it really does lead into kind of transition of, okay, now what? Kevin nailed it, right? Trust is a big one. That people, again, let's put it this way. I'll say this as Big Ten announces that they're going back to they're looking to come back to play football. Anybody that's decided to postpone their season, right, or even cancel their season, from a fan perspective, I'm not speaking from a student athlete perspective, but from a fan perspective, our data indicates that is very much a logical decision you could arrive at, which is to say people are not really ready to come back, is what really our data would say in many ways. Or, right, at a minimum, the information out there, they're not trusting of the information that's out there, short of social distancing, right, short of the capacity numbers and the ability for them to control their own environment, right? So again, I'd reiterate, what we are seeing is that we are not past, right, the minimum requirement of needs being met for people to go out and worry about discretionary spending, right? People are still worried about their safety. They really are struggling to come back out. And we have seen this in the form of ticket sales and viewership, right? That right now, even the stadiums that have open to limited capacity, right, are actually not selling all their tickets in some cases. So it's reflective of, to me, it's a positive and a negative, right? It means that our hope was that people were really excited about events. The truth is that maybe they're not quite there yet, but there's plenty of indication that when they become comfortable, they are ready. They are ready to do something. Is that a fair assessment, Kevin?
Yeah, I think so.
And yeah, again, not to be too specific, but right, just because we have a game, this goes back to our experience point. Just because an event is happening does not mean people are going to care, right? It is about the experience, and it isn't about telling people how safe your place is because of COVID, right? So again, it's turning now. Okay, what do you do with the information that we have? So I'm going to do this kind of from a few different perspectives, looking at history, short-term solutions, long-term or mid-term solutions, or near-term, and then long-term solutions. So one great historical, or a couple great historical lessons that we can pull from that are in some ways similar to this, at least in the kind of the framework of the challenge, is 9/11, right? So in other words, not the events of 9/11, but the aftermath, and when it comes to travel safety. We can look at TSA versus Clear as a very good example, right? So because and this is really, again, goes back to why we did our research in the first place. The early response to safety when it came to 9/11, right, was TSA, which was a very methodical, literal response to how do I keep weapons off of planes. Soon thereafter, right, Clear comes along and says, wait a second, really what we're trying to do is make air travel safer. If we can just determine who is a risk and who is not, we might be able to filter through a whole bunch of people before they even get to the airport, right? And therefore worry less about the impact of the experience, if you will, of the process. You don't have to change the existing processes quite as much if we can screen people in advance. So it's a very good example of kind of a reaction versus kind of a proactive solution to a major safety issue in our history. Right. But then the other question of that is, okay, well, what is the long-term impact, short-term impact of air travel in general after 9/11? Because we can learn something from that as well. Right. So immediately following 9/11, of course, you have a huge drop off in air travel. But by about 3 years later, so right before 9/11, you had about 65 million travelers per month. By about 3 years later, 2004, we're back at the same level. And by 2005, a year after that, we've exceeded what the pre-9/11 travel was. So we're at 71 million travelers per month by July of 2005. What's interesting, however, is airlines did not increase their capacity. So while more air travelers are out there by 2005, you notice around then, all airplanes started being full, right? So anybody that travels a whole bunch, which is mostly, this group usually did or does, right? You notice that planes started getting fuller around 2005 and thereafter. That is because airlines did not increase their capacity, right? They just charged more, generally speaking. So they became more profitable actually following 9/11. It took a while. They took a huge hit, obviously, right? But then about 3 or 4 years later, their business model effectively changes. The same thing happens in movie theaters. So both sports and movie theaters are often thought of as recession-proof. And that's because they're both places people go to escape. So I'll point back to experience, right? The reason we focus on experience with a live event and not remind people that COVID is out there, right? Think of Clear versus TSA. TSA is a reminder of 9/11, right? So in movie theaters, people go there to escape. Same thing with sporting events. So if we look at the last, great, what is it? It was called I can't remember, the last recession, 2008, 2010, right? We actually see an increase in movie theater attendance, but we also see a cutting of jobs, a cutting of capacity, right? So fewer seats, fewer jobs, higher prices, more profit. Same thing happens in the movie theater industry at times like this. So you see a pattern kind of quickly emerge that, and by the way, I'm not calling out movie theaters or airlines. There was a reason they had to cut jobs in the moment. There's a reason they had to cut capacity in the moment, right? Because it really was down. So the difference is as the demand for their product, if you will, increased, they did not match it as heavily, right, with capacity. So understandable. They changed their business model in light of, they sort of reset in because of the crisis. So short term, let's talk about that. There is an impact short term. This is actually work we did at the University of Missouri, which is being implemented as we speak. So this is our response to the existing conditions. So in other words, we'd love to know who has COVID and be able to screen them in advance, right, and not worry about the inside the stadium. Well, that's not possible right now. So this is the way we look at still effectively creating a solution that allows people to come back to an event, but focus on the experience as opposed to focusing on ultimately focusing on COVID, right? First, we surveyed their fans. This was back in the middle of the summer, but we used this to inform kind of what they cared about and what they didn't. At the time, this was relatively reflective of the national survey. And then of course, we'd expect it to change over time. But then what we start to do is figure out within the stadium, right, where are the major vulnerable areas? And then how do we look at solutions? Are they physical solutions, process solutions, or messaging solutions, behavioral solutions, right? So looking at many different ways we can solve a problem without it costing a ton of money and or making sure that it's low cost, right? Or temporary, because we don't expect this to be forever. And what we did is we took the categories of fans we'd expect to be at the stadium, and we mapped out their day. So we said, okay, from the very beginning of buying tickets all the way to the end of the game, what is their day going to look like, and where are their emotions likely to ebb and flow? Because again, right now we're dealing with anxiety and fear, and we want to bring those emotions down. Normally we want to amplify and enhance the excitement of an event, right? So it's a little bit different of a challenge. So we did that by focusing people's day on a zone, and in particular on a color and a number. So instead of telling you all about the barriers and the safety things we've done for you, we said all we need you to remember is your color and your zone. You are assigned to that zone where you will sit, right? You're in zone 4, yellow, right? That's all I need you to remember. When you park, you're going to see a sign. You're going to walk up to the stadium. You're going to go in your entrance, and you're going to sit in your color and your zone. And by the way, you're only going to be around about 1,500 people total throughout the course of your day. So now we can lower the fears, lower the emotions, the negative emotions that are existing, right, in this environment. Focus them on a very simple solution that is all about experience and is not anything about COVID, right? It's really about, that's all. This is where you're sitting. This is your color. That's all I need you to know. So this is the basic framework of what we can do with, right, the constraints of today, of the near term. Right. Also, we have to start looking at, as we look at athletic departments in general, right, digital solutions, things of that nature, changing behavior, right? So crises, major moments, major events, generally speaking, allow for major behavioral changes. Again, if we look at an airport, people are far more willing to do things now that they would have never been willing to do prior to 9/11. Same thing holds true today. People are far more willing to do a Zoom call, a webinar, right, a digital experience than they ever were before. And this is, part of our solutions that we are seeing both at colleges, universities, and the corporate world. This is bringing spaces, bringing experiences into the digital world, into the virtual world. So this is like, think of it as a tour, right? A way to tour a facility, tour a city, tour, whatever it may be, and a way to meet at the end of the day. Same thing, right, on different technology solutions when it comes to augmented reality, right, virtual reality, same deal. We should see a rise. We are seeing a rise in the demand of these types of solutions because people are far more open and willing to experience in them than immersive media, right? How do we experience things together? Still, but in smaller groups. But also, right, we have to understand the implications in the short term of behavioral change. So this is, don't dig too deep here, but discretionary spending, Kevin spoke to it earlier, or we spoke to it earlier, why are people maybe not fully ready to come out? They're still worried about their money, their jobs, and their safety, right? But they are spending some money on TV, but they're not spending it quite as much. They are still cutting cords, let's put it that way. I think this is very important for this audience because, so what we're seeing, right, is people are still worried about their jobs. They're still worried about their paycheck. Most of their spending is going to basic needs, but they are consuming content, right, in an increasingly new way, generally speaking, from history, right? They are cutting cords still. So that tells us the digital frontier, right? Your digital rights, your digital revenue is certainly, we all know that there was a huge future in that, but I would expect it to accelerate as a result of this experience. Things will become more digital. Therefore, those properties of yours become more valuable, right? And by the way, it probably has some level of implication on the name, image, likeness scenario, right? Where now if people are more open to the idea of digital in general, right, the values of both properties and individuals is likely to increase in all of this as well, which means we'd like to think we can actually gain from both. So opportunities and trends, understanding this, right? So again, the opportunities that exist is people are now focused more locally. That opens up our audience for right, new experiences. So people who might generally have flown to somewhere are probably more open to a local experience in at least the near term, right, over the next few years. So we might be able to capture a new audience that doesn't do their normal travel, vacation, or other experiences. And then of course, the digital rights we just talked about. Concerns, again, it's going to be hard to overcome job, paycheck, and health concerns, right? So we have to let those things figure themselves out to a certain extent before we can expect the world to be totally normal. And that jives with history, right? We know it took 2 to 3 years to be back to normal rates in the airline industry after 9/11. So short term, near term, Kevin talked to the testing, right? We know that right this moment, there is some concern about testing. Well, assuming that continues to evolve as we'd expect it to, it becomes very much your clear type solution. If testing is reliable, consistent, and cheap enough, right? Just providing that I have a negative test in the last 12 hours or whatever the time frame is deemed to be safe, right? Becomes your ultimate hall pass. Now I know that I don't have to change anything about my event. I just need to make sure I scan people in advance, or they show me their boarding pass that they have taken a test, right, recently. And they go through our stand, right? This is something we've worked on with Black and Beach for KU, right? That you can pass through this station, scan your boarding pass, you have a negative test, go on in, right? We don't have to worry about this. We don't have to worry about what happens thereafter. The person is negative. We only need to scan them. We're good to go. That to me is right. That or vaccines potentially, depending on kind of how this plays out, that becomes the easy fix, the easiest fix in the short term. You know, if immunity vaccines aren't there, this is a way we overcome that relatively quickly. In the short term, this can also serve as screening stations, check-in stations, whatever it may be. But it's a way that we're tackling the market for temporary, semi-permanent solutions that we know ultimately you want to be able to take out once we're, a few years down the road. Sorry, there's a rudimentary example currently as we're looking to make it pretty, but you can see functionality. It's very very effective. This is the idea: drive through or walk up, right? Ways to scan or ways to get screened or show that you have a negative test before you enter an event. So let's jump a couple cycles ahead. What we do know is that okay, well, once the movie theaters changed, right, we know that we've had to change the offering. So in other words, we know that revenues are a bit of an issue for athletics. We know that budgets will be a little bit of an issue for athletics, right, for a while. We may have to rethink some of the ways that some of the offerings that we have out there. People may not just be willing to come back to their regular old seat. And we have to think about how this market's going to evolve and what we've seen in other industries under similar circumstances. So it's rethinking partnership structures, it's rethinking sponsor structures, right? It's rethinking the offerings we have both inside and outside the stadium, and rethinking in particular premium, right? That the giving people a whole new experience that they'll spend a substantial amount of money potentially for, right? At different levels. So here's an example of a VIP bar scenario that can easily be implemented into inside or outside any given stadium. People could rent the entire unit, right? Rent each side of the unit, or you could do individuals. But again, a unique offering for the market that is different than what you already have, different than sitting in a chair back, right? Or you can start to write, it's a broader shot, right? You can even start to go bigger and bolder than that. Again, ultra premium, new offerings, new ways to attract sponsors, attract donors, attract people to your event, right, in a different way. Elevated tailgating outside of a stadium. Again, VIP experiences helps with COVID. You're elevated, you're separate, but starting to think about unique offerings that where do you invest now as we get ready for the market to turn back to where you'd expect it to go in 2 to 3 years. That's really the emphasis of this. This is thinking about 2 to 3 years from now, where's the market going to go? They're not just going to walk back into a traditional setting. What can we do to make this different and at the same time create a new revenue model? And you can start to get crazier than that, right? You could really start to step out as you look at P3 partnerships, right? You could even go the way of Airbnb. You want to put Airbnb, right, or actual rentable housing units in your parking lot, right? You can really take this a step further. So my emphasis on this, right, is to think about, we aren't thinking about next year or the year after. We're thinking about 3 to 5 years. Where do we want to invest our money with the right structure? Where can we invest today so we're ready to take advantage of the market as it turns back our way? And that is offering things that we are not offering right now. So there you go. That's where we can help. That's a good little dabble, little sampling of the ways we can help, how we approach experiences, right? What we've learned from the efforts we've done and kind of where we're headed with our clients, both short-term and long-term. So did I miss anything, Kevin? Oh, that's not very helpful. It's kind of hard to read my name and contact information in that. I'll fix that.
No, I don't think so. We had a couple of questions come in. I tried to answer them through just a written response to folks. So I think if others have questions, we're ready.
Perfect. Oh no, no one, wait, did we lose everybody? Did I bore them, Kevin? It's possible. It's just
Good. Those renderings of the, I love those renderings of the tailgate, second level tailgate. Those are sweet.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Yeah. No, it's, it's been a big part of, it's a big leap for people to make, but public-private partnerships, right? Revenue sharing, new revenue models and new premium offerings, especially outside of a stadium, but also in, you can just kind of see that's where the market's going to turn, right? That's kind of the way industries come out of recessions that are in the event industry, right? Experience industry is actually, you come out with a whole new offering, a more profitable offering, just like movie theaters have done, made the seats larger, you can lounge, all those things. That's kind of the way to think about it.
Yeah, and I would say from the surveying, we've seen there is some, I guess there is some reason to believe that people's interest in participating in the way they used to in sports is just not gonna come right back, right? So the idea that you're setting the agenda for how the fans who do want to go back will be able to participate differently.
Yep. Yeah, you figure, right? You're going to have a attrition of, let's say 15 to 20% or something to that effect. Not forever, but at least in the short term, you're going to have a chunk of people that just weren't that big a fan. So they have kind of decided they don't need it. And we know that's a very important percentage, whatever it ends up being. And so it is part of giving a new offering to the people that are going to spend the money, but also staying interesting to the people that you're afraid you're going to lose.
Well, I'm a good example of the TSA Clear. I'm a devoted Clear member now, and that's whatever it is, $200 a year that I never used to spend, that I don't even think about now.
Oh, but yeah, if you're a heavy traveler, if you've ever been to Orlando, it's worth it.
Yeah.
Okay, not seeing. We got nothing. We got nothing. No questions. Wait, here's something maybe. Do either of you feel there's a sweet spot percentage for capacity in a stadium? Yeah, so right now is a little tough because, well, here, let's put it this way. Let's take the immediate situation we're in. No question, pure social distancing is a have to. No question. That's a strong statement by me. Generally speaking, our responses would indicate that, right? That at a minimum, abiding by social distancing capacity is important. After that, right, it's kind of a moot point. That yes, technically, as your capacity goes down, people's feelings about it might go up, but it's sort of like, what's the point? After that, right, I think the ultimate goal is to figure out a way to, what Kevin just said, screen people in advance that allow us to everyone to feel safe about the people that are around, right? So if there's a way to ultimately, as technology and healthcare catches up, right, we know that this person has either tested, vaccinated, whatever it may be, but we know that no one walking in our stadium has COVID. That's the ultimate fix.
And Drew, what do you I mean, one of the things you mentioned in the article that you recently wrote is, I think, relevant to this question of capacity, because baked into the question is, at what level of fan participation are the attending fans going to enjoy the experience too? Mm-hmm. That right. If you have 1% capacity, what are those fans that are in that 1% really experiencing? Or do they like it? Do they love having the space and the access, or does it feel like a completely different animal? I know I watched the Denver Broncos Monday Night Football game this week, and they had allowed 500 fans in the audience that were friends and family of the Broncos players, and they just shot camera footage of them in the crowd, and you're thinking it kind of feels, like they aren't having any kind of experience, like they're just in a giant empty stadium. There happens to be a football game going on.
Yeah, no, that's well said.
And
at some point you can ask yourself if we're devaluing our product, right, by doing this. It's worth a mention, it's worth a discussion that we're working under the assumption in the industry as a whole that just by having football, everyone's happy, right? And that sort of ignores the overall reason we do this, which, again, speaking from a fan perspective, it is about a broader experience. It is not really just about a football game being played. So I think that people's tolerance for that for a season is one thing, right? That this is a unique scenario, novel year. But at some point, I think that you have to ask yourself if you're eroding the value of our product in sorry for lack of a better phrase, product in general.
Say though, and I don't think we said this specific statistic from the data, but from the survey the follow-up survey we just did in the last week, we asked about 5% capacity, and the data is that 69% of our respondents said they would go to an event with 5% capacity in the next 6 months. So, that's a significant proportion. That's greater than a lot of the other interventions we've tested.
But that's only like 2,000 people. So that's the hard part. But it does tell us something, right? It does tell us like people want to go out, I guess is one thing that certainly tells us.
Yeah. It also doesn't tell us if they actually would go under that scenario when the time comes.
Yeah, and then one just came in. What are your thoughts on installing thermal detection technologies to security checkpoints to detect elevated temperatures on people short-term and long-term? I'll tell you one thing that's interesting on this front. The first times we surveyed, this was less of a needle mover, and it actually became more of one in our third survey in August. That I think a lot of people thought this was more of a novelty, but I think it became actually more interesting and more valuable to them as information in our surveying progressed, which is to say it would indicate that there is some level of like, it's an indicator that the event itself cares or is trying or is putting in some measures. So without being specific, right, do I think people should do it or not? It would seem that it does make a difference to people more so than it did earlier earlier in March, June. Would you agree, Kevin?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it comes with the caveat that people still don't. My sense is that our respondents do not feel that temperature taking is comprehensive, right? It has to be part of something more comprehensive.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, very fair. Then someone just asked, for programs not playing right now, for the fans that are vocally displeased with them not playing, how do you suggest to best combat those feelings? Do you ignore them, share the data of where decisions are coming from? Yeah, so first and foremost, yes, is my answer, is providing a clear justification and decision criteria for how you arrived at it is, to me, really important. That if this is the criteria we use to make a decision and nothing's being met, therefore we're not doing it, that to me is really important. The other side of that is I'd expect, right, we know that a certain percentage of fans are diehard, rabid fans that just want to come to an event. And I'm sure that's also who's being most vocal, but the data does support the broader audience that you're making that you're doing the right things, making the right decisions, or listening to your people. So I would say a plan, backed by the data is how you answer that question. And I realize wholeheartedly, athletic directors, athletic departments get nailed by the most avid fans, right? And that group is really important to an athletic department. I do understand that, but that is the answer, right? It's an uncomfortable answer, but that to me is exactly how to approach it.
I would just add that you are also talking about a strategic communication choice there, and this probably goes without saying, but to call back on the data about the political divides, even on the issues with respect to sports, you're going to be talking to a very different audience depending on who you're trying to address. If you're trying to address people that are concerned about the virus, that's a very different group than people who just want to have the freedom to attend. And I think, that's worth integrating into your thought process.
Yeah, so just to add to that, Kevin, because you've said this, and maybe this helps set it up. There's actually scenarios in which mentioning the words COVID or using COVID as an excuse actually is a more negative reaction than a positive one, right? So if the audience, we know that the most vocal fans are likely to be of a certain background, demographic, political leaning, they are actually bound to say, to give you less of an out, be less sensitive to COVID reasons than others. So do you want to explain that a little more, Kevin?
Yeah, it's just in some of the other survey work, we got the exact reaction Drew described, that when you ask about people's reactions to an issue independent of COVID, in some subgroups, it's more positive if you don't use COVID as a reason for an action or a behavior. And so this goes directly to the political divide and to the messaging strategy that I was just talking about, that if you know you're trying to reach your diehard fans who are not concerned about the virus, who just want to understand why they can't watch their team, using COVID as part of your answer may actually be less effective than an approach that focuses on a broader issue or a broader explanation for where we are in terms of your planning, in terms of your decision making about games. So, I know that's kind of abstract, but I think that idea that using COVID as an excuse for some of your fans could actually boomerang.
Yeah. So, right. So so then how do you pivot off of that? Right. Then again, it's about, the general fan base isn't ready. It could be about money, jobs, whatever it may be, right? That there's a lot of talking points in there that aren't about, well, COVID rates are up, right? If that makes sense. Understanding your audience.
Yeah, exactly.
Or experience, you can even go that path. What else we got here? It appears we might be on it.
Some good questions.
Anything else, Kevin? How much longer do you have to stay in your prisoner of war hotel?
I'm walking out the door as soon as this is over, and I'm going to be flying on an airplane later today, so that's good.
Love it.
Going through the clear line.
As you should.
Well, as we come to the top of the hour, I just want to thank you both again, Drew and Kevin, for lending your time and your expertise to our NACDA and affiliates members on this topic. I think this research you've done has been great, and it provides a really solid baseline for these athletics administrators on campuses across the country who are having to make these tough decisions. And as you touched on the end, they're explaining their decisions to the fans who may be unhappy about what's been going on this fall. So again, just thank you to all of our attendees. Thank you for joining us. You will be sent an email with the recording as well as the presentation slides for this session. And we hope that you'll be able to join us on another NACDA webinar very soon. Take care, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Dana. Thanks, everyone.